All right, everybody. This is our first session today. I have with me Miss Stacy Bostjanick. She is now serving as the Acting Director of Supply Chain Risk Management for OUSD, and I think you may have some news about that. In this role, she is responsible for managing the initiation of the CMMC program and is responsible for establishing all policy and procedures with regard to CMMC. Previously, she served as the DIA, Head of Contracting Activity, in which she was responsible for planning, managing, directing, and accomplishing the total DIA procurement program, specifically for that one program within DIA. And also, she worked as a Senior Contracting Officer for MDA, Missile Defense Agency, where she was responsible for cradle-to-grave execution of over $5 billion of highly complex, cutting-edge contracts for our nation's missile defense system. So breadth of wisdom and experience that she brings to her current role and to our talk today. So before I hand it over, basically what we're going to try to accomplish today is Ms. Bostjanick is going to talk about some of the recent happenings with the town hall that just happened not too long ago, and also too just some latest breaking stuff that's happening this week and last week, and really just over the last couple weeks, I guess, really giving an overview, and then we're going to hit some questions that may have not been answered at the town hall, and also just some general questions from our customer base and some of the folks on the at the conference today. So again, Stacy, thanks for joining us here in Virginia, and I'll let you go and take it from here.
So one part of late-breaking news, Mr. Buddy Dees is going to be taking over as the director of CMMC. So, and I'll still have my fingers in the pie
I'm sure.
On a constant basis, but Mr. Dees is very well-versed and very capable of handling it.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So, but for CMMC, some of the late-breaking and interesting news is our C3 PAOs have begun to be contacted by the DCMA DIBCOC team to set up their Level 3 assessments, and they will continue to work with each of the C3 PAOs as they become validated and ready for prime time to get in and do their Level 3 assessment, because we do view the assessment documentation that they are going to be handling as sensitive, and we want to ensure that that data is held in the highest security, because this is the roadmap to a lot of these people's networks.
Right, and I guess regardless of any of the debate of whether or not it's CUI or whether or not it's a certain data type, it still needs to be protected.
Right. And so, one of the raging debates on LinkedIn was it can't be allowed to be CUI because it's not under a contractual relationship.
Sure.
But it is, because we have a no-cost contract with the CMMC AB, and the C3 PAOs are going to have a contractual relationship with the AB as their sub.
Yeah.
So either way you look at it, we can make it CUI. But I would tell you my comfort level is it needs to be handled as CUI because it's sensitive data.
That's right.
So that's where we want to go with it.
Yeah.
And, I think it only makes sense that these companies are held to the same standard that they're holding others to.
Sure.
And it's a double-edged sword or a benefit for these C3 PAOs, because they get to experience an assessment by the DIBCOC assessors who have already been trained and examined, gone through the examination process with the CMMC AB to make sure that they are appropriately trained. They have years of experience because they've been doing the DoD assessments for us. So they have a lot of experience. So these C3 PAOs will get to experience what it's like to go through an audit on their own, as well as they will be the ones that will now be performing those audits against the OSCs, right? The organizations seeking certification. That's the CMMC AB term. It took me for a minute.
Yeah.
OSCs
remember them all.
It means something else to me, right? So anyway, so that's where the C3 PAOs are. Now we have 100 assessors that have been trained and examined and have gotten provisional acceptance. And the reason why they're in a provisional phase is because we're still in the interim rulemaking process. The interim rule became effective on November 30th, which means we can now implement it and make it a requirement in contracts, a requirement for award. But we are still going through the rulemaking process. So in that vein, we've completed public comment on the 30th of November as well. Those comments have come into our organization, and we are bucketizing them by category, and then we will begin the process of, and we have already begun the process of adjudicating and answering those comments. Once those are done, it'll go back to OMB. We'll go through the rest of their process. There's an interagency review and some other things that have to happen. The rule will probably be finalized, become a final rule probably by August, because it still has to go back to a congressional review after it finalizes all the other interagency and other reviews and the adjudication of comments. Mm-hmm. But by virtue of the fact that OMB recognized the extreme national security issue that we're under, that's why they allowed us to make it an interim rule, saying we could put it into effect now while we're continuing the process of making it a final rule. So while the assessors have been trained, and they have also been certified, because of the fact that there could be changes to the model and the process based on the outcome of the rulemaking process, they're only provisional assessors.
Yeah.
So based on any changes that we see through that process, all of those provisionally trained assessors will have to go back. They will have to have the Delta training, and then they will also have to be re-examined, and they will then be a certified assessor. Gotcha. But in the interim, we've got a lot of different activities going on. We started out last spring, we did some Pathfinder activities. The first one was with the Missile Defense Agency, and if you tuned into the town hall, you heard Miss Diane Knight speak about all we did in that Pathfinder. We did model contract language, we did model RFI language, we went through a model post-award conference between the prime and the program office to make sure we mapped CUI down through the supply chain, because one of the most important parts of CMMC is recognizing the controlled unclassified information, making sure it's appropriately marked, right, as well as making sure that when you flow it down to your subs, you're only flowing the information that they have to do their job. Right? Because one of the things that you don't want to do is just package up that entire tech data package, shove it down to your subcontractor, because then they're going to be in a position where they're going to be in receipt of controlled unclassified information when they don't need it. Right? And that puts them in a position where they may have to rise to a CMMC level 3 requirement when they don't need it. They can be a CMMC level 1. Right. So we need to be very cognizant and purposeful how we pass data down to our subcontractors to ensure that they have the right data and only the data necessary to do the job that you've asked them to perform.
Right, and I would imagine for many contracts, especially prime contractors, they have a PM or a DPM. That's really going to be, there's going to need to be an element of training and just really just communication from the actual contractor, the company itself, telling their PMs, telling their DPMs, hey, you need to be cognizant of how you ship things down to subcontractors, and not just trying to take the short and easy route of, again, just shipping data downward, being very cognizant of that flow down.
And to that end, because I know there's a lot of confusion surrounding CUI. People are very confused by it, and they're not exactly sure how to mark it and what it is. There is a great training out. It's dod.cui, I think, .mil, and it's a
we can drop that in chat either way.
Right.
So
it's a brand new training that they've come up with that gets rave reviews. Everybody says it's great. We've got that training that's out for everybody. We've also been working with DAU.
Yeah, I was about to say they're actively working on
projects.
Oh, yeah,
to make sure that we train our program managers and our contracting officers. And one point that I want to make sure everybody knows, since I used to be an old contracting officer, it's not the contracting officer's responsibility to mark the controlled unclassified information in a contract. It's the program manager's responsibility. The contracting officers need to ask the question and ensure that it's been thought of, but it's not their responsibility to identify that CUI. For all my contracting officer friends out there.
It's oversight, not responsibility.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So what we're doing with the provisional trainers and the Pathfinders is, so we did the MDA Pathfinder, and we did a lot of good mock assessments and got a couple of subcontractors, went through a mock assessment at the level 1. And one of the things that I was heartened to see was the one level 1 that didn't pass. It wasn't anything huge that caused them not to pass it. They were silly things, like they forgot to have the log at the front desk where people sign in and sign out for positive access control.
I see.
They had a back door that was into their data center that they propped open with a rock because their people like to come in and out and to go smoke cigarettes, right? So those are not expensive things to fix to make sure you can pass.
Right.
They're just things you've got to think about.
Yeah.
So for them, they will easily be able to sail through a level 1 assessment, right? Because they were there. They just had a couple little things that weren't expensive to fix. I mean, a lot of consternation has been about the cost and how this works. So from the MDA Pathfinder, we use DCMA, DIBCOC assessors that were trained with CMMC and gone through the certification exam and that to do those mock assessments. Now, when we go through the next Pathfinder with DLA, we will hopefully be able to reach out and use actual C3 PAOs and actual CMMC AB assessors to do that mock assessment. And those are all risk reduction activities that the department's taking to make sure that when we roll this out prime time, we've got it ironed out. We don't have a lot of glitches. Now, having said that, we all know there's going to be something that's going to come up that we haven't thought about that we'll have to be able to accommodate, and we're definitely going to do that, right?
Yeah.
We're committed to making sure that we take these things as they come up and we handle them. So those are our Pathfinders. Along that same avenue, we're also, at the same time, and we have a team of 3 government people working this, so we're very busy.
Wow.
We are working on our pilots. Now, what we did was Miss Lord, before she left, put out a memo requiring each one of the services to come up with 3 pilots, and then the members of the 4th Estate to also nominate pilots, some of the other agencies. So she put out a press release with 7, which were the first ones that we got, and hence we've gotten some others from the Army. We have the Army Foreign Military Sales Field Service Representative Support contract is a candidate pilot. Also with the Army, the Women and Infant and Children Overseas Program for DHA and TRICARE. Also with the Army is the Main Operating Base Installation Service Nodes. Then we move to the Navy. They've nominated the Integrated Common Processor, the F-18 EF Full Mod S-Bar Shut-Off Valve. Sorry, couldn't see that one very well. Shut-Off Valve. Then you've got also with the Navy, the DDG-EI Lead Yard Service and Follow-On Yard Service Program. The Air Force has nominated the Mobility Air Force Tactical Data Links, the Consolidated Broadband Global Network Area Network Follow-On, and then the Azure Cloud Solution. And then Missile Defense Agency has nominated the Technical Advisory and Assistance Contract. So what we're going to do with all of these is we're going to go and we're going to vet them to ensure that the timeline meets up. Because it's not our intent to have CMMC hold up any program or cause them not to be able to get to award in a timely fashion. So we're going to work so closely with them to ensure that the timing is right, that we have the ability to identify that CUI and have it flow down into the subs at the appropriate level. We'll be working hand in glove with them, and Miss Diane Knight from our office is heading up that. And I stole her from MDA.
Sorry, MDA, if you're on right now.
And she actually helped MDA when they started doing their work with their subs with controlled unclassified information and mapping it down the supply chain. So she's a subject matter expert, and I stole her for that particular reason because I knew she would be perfect for helping us out with this. So the first pilot that's going to be out of the block that we're going to start working with is that F-18 full mod S-bar and shutoff valve. And then I think the second one is an Air Force program. The one thing I will tell you about the Air Force program that's the Azure Cloud Solution, this is a pilot that they're working on where they're providing the subcontractor a government cloud environment to operate in. So we'll be able to see how that will work, ring that out for CMMC and the protection of those end user devices that are contacting that cloud. So that one will be a very interesting, it will have a lot of data that will come back on both sides.
I'm sure. It's that way they can kind of deploy different engineering workloads in that kind of test bed environment and deploy them from there. That's great.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So from there, I think the assessors are going through their suitability determinations right now. We have several that already had existing suitability determinations that can move forward. And we're hoping that they'll be working closely with their C3 PAOs, and we can start ringing out some of these CMMC assessments, hopefully by mid-March.
Yep, fingers crossed.
I get my fingers crossed. I'm holding my breath, you know. So that's our excitement for now. I think, barring that, I think we can go into questions.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate the candor. Obviously, even talking about hiring decisions, you're about to make MBA, MAD if you keep taking.
I know
some of
they
their
do
folks.
have a couple of really good people that we're thinking about.
That's good though. I'm glad you guys are bringing the talent that you need into the organization, because obviously the task can be daunting at times, and so that's great. So I guess first question, there's been some recent news around reciprocity, and we were talking about Azure earlier, but obviously some of the bigger cloud vendors, you got Amazon with AWS, Microsoft obviously with Azure and some of their cloud offerings, Google, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be some reciprocity, meaning, these vendors, these cloud service providers, they meet certain cybersecurity requirements at the data center level, at their level when they provide those offerings. And so there's certain boxes that they more or less can check because of how they manage their data center. They don't have a rock in their door, for instance. So they're
Let's
checking.
Hope not, right?
Yeah, right. That's right. So, they're not having anybody taking smoke breaks. So they're compliant, meeting certain requirements, let's say at the physical level. And I believe, and you can correct me and kind of speak to this, the aim is that some of those boxes will be checked and covered and then kind of flowed down to contractors. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So we have completed the DoD DIBCOC assessment reciprocity with CMMC, and that memo is up for signature to finalize that. And then we are currently working with FedRAMP and GSA to come up with a reciprocity agreement. Now, when we do this, we also include the DIB members. So we're working with GSA, we're working with industry and ourselves, our subject matter experts, to make sure that we draw a good reciprocity between the two.
Sure.
One of the big differences between FedRAMP and CMMC is that FedRAMP does allow POAMs. And CMMC does not allow POAMs. Right. So if you are a cloud provider that currently has POAMs for some of your requirements under FedRAMP, you would not get credit for that under CMMC.
I see.
So we're working through that with FedRAMP, and then we have various other cyber programs that we're working to try to help do reciprocity, as well as internationally. So I'm working with some of our allied partners, and we're all trying to do a crosswalk between CMMC and their cyber programs and do a crosswalk amongst them all.
Right.
There are a couple of countries that do not have a cyber program yet, and they're strongly looking at adopting CMMC.
Gotcha. So it just depends on country by country, nation by nation, whether or not if they have a program, then they're more or less not adopting, but they're adapting. And then for nations that do not, they're adopting wholesale, possibly looking at CMMC.
Right,
yeah.
We haven't gotten there yet.
Sure.
And I also will tell you that we've had 2 other federal agencies that have said they're going to adopt CMMC as well. Right. I don't think there's been a public announcement made for one of them. I know DHS has been very vocal that they said they will definitely adopt a CMMC. So we're working through that with the AB to say how we would bring on other federal agencies. From our perspective, I think it only makes sense that DoD remains the executive agency for CMMC, that we continue to use the same DIBCOC assessment procedures for the C3 PAOs. Because the one thing that we have to have with CMMC is consistency across the board. You can't have one agency adopting quasi-CMMC and asking for one set of requirements and DoD having another will drive industry nuts with having multiple different certifications. I also think that having the DIBCOC team do the assessments for the C3 PAOs makes sense, because then you have that consistency across the board for how your C3 PAOs are evaluated, right? But We haven't signed on the dotted line with any of these agencies yet, so there could be things that change in the interim, but that's kind of the way we're leaning and where we would like to go with it.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, obviously, because as you probably know very well, this process of standing up a maturity model and a certification process and assessors and training and all the things that go into making CMMC work, it's an undertaking. And so then duplicating that effort again for another agency or another set of agency is probably not the best use of taxpayer dollars in some cases.
Exactly.
And I could also imagine even with like Department of Energy, for instance, I mean, the DOD maybe doesn't have as much of an obvious tie to the Department of Energy, but let's say the energy grid is susceptible to cyber attack, the national energy grid, that very well impacts the DOD in our operations here at home. So,
Yes.
So I could definitely see that.
Cyber is going to become something that's going to be cross-cutting across the whole world, right? As we saw with SolarWinds, right? The recent efforts with our adversaries to take down our infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And it was federal agencies, industry writ large that all got hit. Mm-hmm. And we have to protect against it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of you mentioned DIBCOC earlier, and obviously those assessments of C3PAOs are underway, or at least that process has started. Are those C3PAOs having to pay for those assessments? How does that work? What's that arrangement like, if you will?
No, so one thing is you cannot pay the federal government. So
I've heard that.
I think they call it augmentation of funds.
Yeah.
So we can't do that. But what we have determined is it makes good business sense to have the impartiality of the government agency doing the assessments of the C3PAOs. It doesn't make sense for one C3PAO to assess another, right? And have them have to pay each other because, then it's ripe for disputes.
Right.
So with that, with the C3PAOs being assessed by the DIBCOC team, I think we have consistency across the board. We have hopefully the integrity of the process, right? Those assessors are very good. They have high integrity, high standards, and so we'll ensure that all the people that are doing the assessments for us will ascribe to that same level.
Right. Another question too that we mainly received a lot, especially, so we talked to Katie in October of last year, and one of the questions back then, and I think it still remains true right now, and I think it's good to speak to it. There was a lot of question about the relationship between the CMMC AB and the DoD, and there seemed to be to the industry, there was talk that there was a seeming disconnect, or that it didn't seem like they were doing many things jointly. But I think now, especially as you saw with the town hall meeting, it seems like there's more of a closer connection, more collaboration, even public collaboration, like in the town hall. Is that true?
Yes. It definitely is true. As with any relationship, you all go through your forming, storming, and norming.
Yeah, right.
And so, through the negotiation process that we went through with them, and each person had their opinion. We worked through that.
Yeah.
And we are now one team, one fight, very cohesive.
Under contract.
And we always were one team, one fight. I think just when you're ironing out the details there, that's where. And unfortunately, I think people out on social media take a little something and make it something big, right?
Sure.
And we have our naysayers. We have people who are trying to make a quick buck off of CMMC. There are a lot of organizations out there that are pop-up organizations. We've seen the CMMC Center of Excellence. We've seen the CMMC Center of Awesomeness, which I thought was really cool. It was funny.
Clever naming, right?
Oh, yes. And we have all of these organizations that are on their own. Yeah. They're not authorized by DOD. They're not sanctioned by DOD. And, the CMMC AB is our only authorized source. And they are the ones that are authorizing and accrediting the C3PAOs and the RPOs and the assessors. And we have actually sadly heard of companies that have gotten hoodwinked by some of these other organizations that said, hey, I can get you certified, and they pay them a good bit of money and they come in and they don't really do much, and they didn't really help them, and this small business is upset because they're out this money,
right,
and they didn't get where they wanted to go. And unfortunately for us, we can't stop public
free
commerce,
market and
free
everything
market
else,
and all that, right? We can just pray and
continue to communicate and have town
Yes.
halls and make things clear
Exactly.
as you can.
and that the people that do establish their free market ability, that they have high integrity, they get the training from the CMMC AB, and that they don't take advantage of some of these poor small businesses that are just trying to make it and provide us a very necessary capability.
Yeah. This one is interesting. We've had this question come up quite a bit, at least just amongst clients and folks that we talk to within industry, this idea of grant funding and things of that nature that flow out to different states, and those are managed either through MEP centers or through other means.
Right.
Can you speak to just any of the hallway conversations or anything else that's kind of percolating around grant funding and things of that nature, even if it's just training related?
So, now we do have a very robust training. We've got Project Spectrum. We've got the PTACs that are being trained that are going to be working with the small business. And I have a biweekly call with the NIST MEP organization, and they're going through the AB training as well, so they can provide assistance to the small businesses and be active with their organizations to help. Now, for the grant money, it has been talked about. I believe there was even something in the NDAA. But since we're in the midst of a late signed NDAA and an administration change, I have yet to see the money.
Yeah, a little bit up in the air.
All right, so we're still working through that, but hopefully it would come. One of the other questions that I keep getting, right, is the new administration going to reverse CMMC?
That's a good one.
Or are they going to
beat me to it?
Yeah, they're going to make the requirements easier. We have seen no indication of that.
Yeah.
CMMC has been a very bipartisan effort. We've got, we get questions from both sides equally, and they're all very interested in it and supportive.
Right.
And one of the things that I would also tell you is with the recent hack with SolarWinds, I don't think that they're going to push to make the requirements less.
Right.
Right, because we've seen how we have been hammered with some of these things. Cybersecurity, like I've said many times, is going to be a whole country issue that we all have to be aware of, right? Even in your own personal life, right? Making sure that you protect your accounts. I met a guy when I was down doing, I think I talked about it last year, I'm not sure. Construction contractor for the government lost $40,000 because somebody stole his cage code identity.
Yeah.
Right? And he calls the government. He's like, when am I getting my money? And they're like, well, we paid you. And he's like, no, you didn't. And they're like, oh, yeah, we did. And we sent it, da-da-da. And when they went and backtracked it, somebody had stolen his identity and redirected those funds to their account. And, for him, $40,000 is a good chunk of change.
Yeah.
That's not peanuts. But when you go to the Justice Department and try to file charges and try to have that looked in upon, they're like, sorry, we don't have time for that. It's not a high enough dollar value for us.
Yeah.
So I think, from that perspective, you have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to protect yourself.
Yeah. Let alone meet the requirements.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. One of the things on, I'm trying to remember what you said earlier. I had a question about.
Sorry.
No. I was paying too much attention. I was getting into what you were saying. So, on the training piece, I know you had said you had these biweekly calls with the MEP centers, and I think the PTACs are also working on stuff with as it pertains to training. Are we thinking 2021 is when this is going to start rolling out some of these trainings and things of that nature?
So Project Spectrum is already rolled out.
That one is, yes.
Yes, and they've been working, and I believe the PTACs are already engaged as well. The MEPs, I know that there was one gentleman that had signed up for the training through the AB, and he was very frustrated, and so they called me to get involved, and his finance people never sent the money. So now that he's got that straightened out, he's going to get the training. One of the other ladies that I've been working with directly is going to be hopefully in the next class.
Okay.
So it's going to be 2021 that they'll have the capability.
Wonderful. Obviously, we've talked about some of the initial contracts that are going to have CMMC language in them. Obviously, we've talked about some of the DIBCOC assessments of C3PAOs, et cetera. Outside of that core group, of the core group of C3PAOs, core groups of primes that are looking at those contracts, that next level, the next level of primes that are outside of just that scope, when do those companies need to get ready, or when can those companies expect to be assessed? Kind of that second wave.
So when you start looking at the pilots that we have, right, those pilots are going to have subcontractors, right? And if you see the list of pilots that we have and you think that, I may be a sub on one of those programs, then you want to start looking at getting your certification.
Yeah.
What I would also tell you is we have the CMMC assessment guides out there. I think they're going to update them here in a little bit with rulemaking and clarify some things that may have not been clear enough. But get those assessment guides. Start looking through them to see what you need to have to be assessed. And they're on our website, so you can download them. And start preparing your company now. Because even if you're not assessed, you need to start implementing the requirements to make sure you protect yourself.
That's right.
So even if you think, hey, I don't have to pay for the assessment for 2 or 3 years because none of my program, I'm in my contracts and they're not coming up for renewal or anything like that, then go ahead and start looking at it. Now, the other thing that companies need to understand is that interim rule was a 3-part rule. And that's been an area of confusion that I probably ought to try to clear up. So that rule had 3 parts. It had 252-204, 7019, 7020, and 7021. 7019 was a provision that goes into solicitations, but it also says that you can't garner an award unless you go into the DoD SPRS system, and it's Supplier Performance Rating System. We call it SPRS because we're all about acronyms. And that's where you have to go in and do your basic self-assessment. They give you a scoring methodology for you to be able to give yourself a score. So at least the DoD knows that you have taken a moment, you've thought through it,
right?
You know that you need a system security plan, and where you don't meet all of the requirements, that you can still have a POAM, but at least you've thought about it. At least you've taken a look at your systems and you've evaluated where you are, right? That's the first step. Then we move to the 70-20 clause. The 70-20 clause is where DoD has the ability to come in and do the medium and the high assessment that says if we ask you, you need to let us come in. Now, the medium assessment is a conversation. It's where you sit down with an assessor, you talk through your system security plan and your POAM, you talk through the artifacts that you have that prove that you've got those controls in place, and it's a conversation. The DIBCOC high assessment is where they actually get to look over your shoulder at your network. Now, in COVID, we've been very successful at doing it fairly virtually. I think there are only 2 or 3 components that are facility
intensive.
Or
not maybe not intensive, but you got to be there.
You got to be on the ground to make sure that door is closed, those kinds of things. Now, we've been using video cameras and FaceTime kind of things where we can to be able to close those gaps, but there are like 2 or 3 that get left unturned that the DIBCOC team will have to come back to finalize to get your all 110. And to that end, what the reciprocity agreement with the DIBCOC assessment is if you score above a 70 on that DIBCOC high assessment, then you would only have to do the delta assessment for CMMC between the 70 and the 130. And if you score below a 70, you have to do the whole thing. And it goes up from there. So if you score 90, then you only have to do the delta. If you've gotten a perfect 110, then you only, for the reciprocity for CMMC, you only have to be assessed against the requirements of the last 20. You don't have to be assessed against the 3 practices that are associated with that. Because they feel like if you've met the 110, then you've already got those practices down pat.
With the basic assessment, speaking of timeline, I know we've discussed a little bit about, when you should start doing things and that kind of thing. As far as SBRS goes, should businesses of all size, prime, small, prime, sub, small, large, doesn't matter, should they go ahead and start doing those self-assessments and getting those in?
Yes.
Is there any reason they wouldn't?
I don't know why they wouldn't need, or
why they wouldn't need to do that now.
No, they all need to.
Okay.
Because one of the things that, and so to be clear, the 7019 and 7020 aren't under my purview, right?
Sure.
So I'm working with other people. So somebody else may say, "What? What'd she say?" But
to be clear, so 7020 is right?
7021 is mine.
21, yeah. Excuse me, not 7020. 7019, 7020
are theirs.
Yeah.
But the 7019 clause is for all contractors that would do business with DoD, and you cannot get an option exercise. If you have an existing contract, you have to have that registration in SPRS to have your option exercised.
Right.
So, and you cannot garner a new award under the DoD unless you have that information in SPRS.
Right.
So there is no reason not to do it.
Yeah.
Right. I think the only people that are excluded are COTS products.
Yes.
Right. And I know I got a question that we have not answered. Is that going to change because of the SolarWinds hack? And so what I would say
that is a great question.
We're looking at, there's a lot of intensive research being done right now with regard to that hack and what it would take to have protected against it.
Yeah.
Or to detect it. So more to come on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of even gets into some of that reciprocity conversation about how software companies, software providers are assess themselves and what certifications they need to get themselves.
Right. And how their software is certified.
How the software, yeah.
Right? There have been a couple of sections in the NDAA that talk to companies needing to come open with if they've shown their software to any of our other countries or adversaries or things of that nature.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. So two last questions. The first being, what steps do organizations need to take to avoid rather overclassifying information or underclassifying information as it relates to them having to meet CMMC Level 3? And I guess we talked about classifying and who's doing the classifying, so maybe that question isn't totally accurate maybe, but even just over-treatment. Is there such a thing? Is it bad for a company, let's say, to configure their entire environment and all their systems as though any of them could have CUI on them? Is there any negatives to that, I guess? And then also, too, is there a way that they could be underclassifying or undertreating their systems or their data, that kind of thing?
So the only negative is the cost associated, right? I mean, undoubtedly, the more secure you make your systems, the better from my perspective and for your own protection.
Sure.
But it does have a cost associated with it, so you have to make that decision.
Yeah.
And I think for the marking of CUI, we're trying to come up with a really good rule of thumb, right? And the best thing that we've come up with is if it's information that if our adversaries got a hold of, they could use against us, or they could use to leapfrog ahead of us, right, that it would give them an advantage against us, then you want to protect it as CUI.
Yeah.
Right? Now, when it comes to working with your prime and working through your contracts, then you need to have that constant communication, because there is contractor-derived information that would fall in the same vein of CUI.
Yeah.
And so you might be like, well, I don't think it needs to be CMM Level 3. I produced it. But if you think about the fact that if you develop something and if our adversaries could get a hold of it, it would give them an advantage, then we want to protect that.
Right.
And then you would want to make that considered a CUI and be protected as such.
Yeah.
But that constant communication with your prime, your next level tier up and your next tier down, and ensuring that when you do flow information, that you only flow what they absolutely have to do their job, because we don't want to put companies in the position of being in receipt of CUI when they don't need to, and having to rise to the level of CMMC level 3.
Right.
It's just like that story I've told a million times about well, not the construction guy, the welder. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, I don't need cyber, I'm a welder. And he had the entire tactical design, structural design of one of our tactical aircraft because they didn't cut out the welds. They just sent him the whole tech data package, right?
Which goes back to your flow down statements earlier about, how do PMs and DPMs need to control what gets sent down and what doesn't.
Exactly. We have got to take, and it's difficult because everybody is overburdened, right? And everybody's being pushed to meet an aggressive schedule. We've got to get things done faster.
Yeah.
So, it's undoubtedly easier just to stick that whole tech data package in an email and shoot it down to the next level and not take the time to cull through it. But we're going to have to.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to have to make sure that we're not putting all our data out there for everybody to see.
That's right. So I have one statement and then the last question. I remember what I was going to say earlier. You were talking about the great question of, so we have a new regime, a new president, and a bunch of new leaders that are coming into place that are going to do great work to serve the country to the best of their ability. Regardless of the change, regardless of any sort of political swing that may or may not be happening, I think most people, whether political leaders, civil servants, and also to just great old citizens of the U.S. of A., I think we can all agree, and I think all of those parties would agree, that regardless of how much money is spent on the DOD, regardless of the initiatives of the DOD, I think we can all agree that the DOD and all of its supply chain needs to be secure.
Yes.
I don't think that is in limbo or anything's going to change about that posture. I think from the newly elected president all the way down, I think everybody agrees that the eye doesn't need to go off the ball, and we need to continue to be focused on that.
The COVID-19 is a perfect example, and it's not just DOD, right? We need to make sure that our national supply chain is protected and is secure, right? When you find yourself in a situation where you don't manufacture enough on your own in your own country, and you're dependent on somebody who's one of our adversaries for a lot of your product, you find yourself in a tough spot.
That's right.
And, I think that has been an eye-opening experience to most people.
Yeah.
And so, we need across our nation, not just DOD, DHS, DOE, all of those agencies need to ensure that their supply chain is secure, as well as our national infrastructure, right? I want to make sure that the drugs that I'm getting from CVS have had a secure supply chain all the way to my dining room table.
That's right.
Right? And, I don't want any, there are adversaries out there that want to take this country down. Yeah. And we need to make sure we protect ourselves against that.
That's a good note. So last question kind of ties into that is if you had, magic wand and you're looking forward to the end of 2021, what would you like to see? This is more of a Stacy question. And again, this isn't, what's to come, please.
Like win the lottery and be on a beach somewhere?
Yeah. So everybody put your pens down. This isn't, a guarantee, but if you could have it your way as it pertains to CMMC, what would you like to see at the end of the year kind of in place, or just anything surrounding CMMC? What would you like to see?
I would want to see wholesale adoption. I would want to see excitement from the industry, and I don't want to...
The right type of excitement?
Yeah, the right type of... yes, a lot of energy and support of CMMC. Now, having said that, we have gotten a ton of support, and we have had most of industry very excited about this and recognize that this is a necessary thing that we have to do. Yeah. Now, on the downside, they think it's a great thing. They know we have to do it, but on the downside, they don't want to have to pay for it. It's gonna take work. Yeah. Right. But if everybody would be recognizing that, it's going to take work, but we got to do this, and we're excited to do this because we recognize the need. Because I want to be able to close my eyes at night and know that my country is secure, and that we don't have that threat of our adversaries overpowering us, or at least taking military and economic advantage. Yeah. And so that was where I would love to be.
That's great. That's great. Well, good deal. Well, Stacy, thank you again for joining us.
Anytime.
We have many more sessions to come, so everybody please stick around. And we're looking forward to more conversations in the future. Obviously, we'd like to also speak to some of the new appointees within your staff as well. So be looking forward to that.
Oh, yeah,
and
awesome.
Again, thanks for joining us here in Virginia.
Yes, and War Eagle.
For those of you in Alabama still. Awesome. Well, everybody stick tight, and we'll be back here in a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.